Aaron Lutzi, we are so back. Second Nature. What episode is this?
This is episode 88. And guess what? By the time people listen to this episode, because I think most people listen to it on weekends when they're out running,
Yeah.
we'll actually have been around for one full calendar year.
Is that true?
Yeah,
Is this the 1 year anniversary since
March
Lululemon's further event?
March 22nd was our first published podcast of last year. And now we've been making a podcast for a year together. So here we are. We made it.
Unbelievable. Kind of serendipitous too, because 88 is my lucky number. That's the number I used to wear playing lacrosse, Lutzi. I was number 88.
There we go. Yeah. I mean,
like Chad Ocho Cinco, I was Debo Ocho Ocho.
Did you ever consider changing your last name legally, like Ocho Cinco?
Should have. Well, buddy, it's good to be back with you. I just returned from a trip to Bellingham. I ran a nice 50-kilometer race, the Chuckanut 50K, which has been around for 31 years over the weekend. And now I'm in race director mode, getting ready for the big Alta happening this weekend. It'll probably be happening as our listeners are tuning into this episode. So busy time, but super, super fun.
What's it like when you go to a race like that? Are you picking up little details that you want to start incorporating into yours, or have you just been to enough races by this point that you already know what you want to do?
Unfortunately, I was just trying to survive this 50K over the weekend. No, it was super fun. Chuckanut is a world-class event. It's one of kind of the oldest, most classic early season races here in North America, and a race that I haven't gotten around to doing in the 17 years that I've been in the sport. I feel like now at this stage of my career, it's time to start checking some of those classics off the bucket list. So I did that at Chuckanut, but yeah, great to finally do it. And there's definitely every time as a race director now that I go experience somebody else's event, I am kind of looking at the operation, seeing how they're doing things, how they go above and beyond, how they enhance the runner experience so that we can try and do the same at our owned events. And we have our first chance here in 2025 to do that here in my neighborhood, Marinwood, California, at the second edition of the Big Alta happening this weekend.
So cool, man. I feel like most people do that at weddings, where like if you've been married, you're like looking at how'd they do that? What they do over there? And now like as a race director, you're doing the same exact thing of like, oh yeah, we should do that at our one. That was a good idea. Or like, I like the way we do ours a little bit better. I was thinking that's kind of fun. But I also think like what you're doing now, how cool. Like you're actually racing for the same reason that most people actually race. You're putting yourself in the everyman's shoes of like, I want to go to this race because it looks fun. I like the course. I like the people that are going to be there. I want to go to that part of the world and run. That's like 99% of why people actually go to these races, not because they're always trying to like be on the podium. And what a different but fun lens for you to actually like look at stuff of like, I've always wanted to run that race and now I'm going to go do it and I'm going to have a blast doing it. I think that's a version of Debo that a lot of people want to see, of like just having a blast running and not just like putting yourself in a pain cave every single time.
That's a really nice way of acknowledging that I'm completely washed up. So thank you, Aaron.
Well, but this is my entire point of like why I've been banging the drum so hard on athletes.
Yeah, I know.
Because it's like this is just as important and just as relevant to your audience, if not more. People will identify.
I have a fun thing on this that I haven't mentioned to you, I don't think, but you know how I went to New Zealand a few weeks ago and did that 50K at Tarawera?
Yeah.
That was the weekend where, of course, it's the worst race performance of my entire career. Had a blast, as we're talking about here, still being able to participate, to engage with the community, to still get out there and do it even without being in contention for podium finishes anymore. That weekend was the weekend, poetically, that our following at Free Trail officially became larger than my personal following. So it was kind of a symbolic passing of the baton. I have my worst race ever, sort of not necessarily officially, but it feels like emerging into the post-competitive chapter of my career at the same exact moment that, at least the subjective, metrics based on follower count starts to indicate the exact same thing. So
Well, you're doing things right, you know? It would be one thing if every single sign was pointing in one direction, but the fact that some things are definitely on the way up has got to be sort of exciting, you know?
Yeah. No, it's great. Super, super fun. So we've got a good docket here today after a little preamble here. We've got OnlyFans news, which we
Oh,
sort of have talked around here on the pod a couple of times. We've got the whole fiasco happening at Outside and a really amazing article that was written over on the Escape Collective by Kaylee Fretz that we wanted to talk about at least a little bit. Lutzie's got some news. We had a fun little Second Nature meetup in Portland I want to hear about. Where should we start?
Mm, let's start with OnlyFans. Why not?
All right. So, our longtime listeners will know that I had a galaxy brain a few months ago that was effectively to create the Patreon for the outdoor industry, for outdoor athletes and creators. And the reason this idea came into my head, we'll remember, is that Tom Evans was one of the favorites going into UTMB last year. And I was doing my research heading into our trailgating week of content, looking at everybody's training, trying to assess who's fit, who's ready. And Tom always keeps his training sort of under wraps. He's not somebody that publishes all the data on Strava, but that data is quite interesting for people like me and for many other people in the sport. Of course, there's a lot of folks who geek out on the stats, the data, the training philosophies of these professional athletes. And I thought, well, that is a product that Tom could sell to his fans. If there were a platform where he could charge a subscription fee to allow people to get access to his training, where he might be able to do a weekly live stream where he talked about it, explained the rationale, that there would probably be a large cohort of individuals, myself included, who would pay for that. During that time, we sort of made the joke. It's sort of like the OnlyFans for outdoor. At that point, I didn't know that OnlyFans had been sponsoring athletes in outdoor and action sports. Turns out they have been doing that, and that potentially the platform was designed for this use case and ultimately was sort of taken over by a different demographic of creator who is now sort of driven the business of OnlyFans to being a $6 billion a year revenue business. Coming back around to why this is timely and newsworthy, Sabrina Stanley, one of the great female athletes in trail running, a two-time Hard Rock champion, just announced last week that she is now officially an OnlyFans athlete. I wrote about it in the Free Trail newsletter. You and I have talked about it privately. It feels like something we should dissect here on the pod.
Yeah, yeah. Huh. In mountain biking, Emmett Olafson also just recently announced a sponsorship by OnlyFans. I think what you wrote in the newsletter, and feel free to expand upon it, was really on point. And the one thing that I would say, well, first of all, going back to the Galaxy Brain, I sort of think Substack and Patreon are already more than capable of delivering the Patreon for athletes. And in fact, on Patreon, I support a handful of athletes who make content and share, some of their behind the scenes training stuff in the bike world. So there's plenty of precedent for that. I also think that Substack, maybe it's just the algorithm that I have, but my Substack is all runners. And so I think there is a pretty big community that's there as well. And there's really nothing stopping anybody from building up that level of support if they were, trying to balance out their career. But one thing that I will say, as someone who has developed followings on Substack, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, it's hard enough to build a following on one of like the most trafficked websites in the world. I cannot even imagine the difficulty level that would be required to build a legitimate following on a site that is not safe for work. Like that is like a difficulty level that's not even necessarily worth chasing down. And I cannot imagine that this is actually going to be a long-term strategy to develop a community that any of these athletes actually can rely on. I'm sure that they're getting paid from OnlyFans, but I cannot imagine that they are going to be able to build a meaningful community because just like you said, there's no way. Like I'm definitely not putting a link to their stuff in the show notes of this episode. There's no way a 45-year-old dad with 3 kids is gonna go onto their website to try to dig up some running content. Zero chance. And I can't imagine there are a lot of people out there that are also who differ in opinion from us.
Yeah, yeah. I was joking around with Harmony. It was like, oh, babe, I got to download OnlyFans so that I can stay up to date on what's happening in trail running. No, this is a classic kind of brand conundrum, right? OnlyFans is a $6 billion a year business. They don't necessarily need to expand into a different category than the one that has to this point driven that monster business. But of course, they probably want to, having no visibility or knowledge into what their long-term plan is, diversifying out of not safe for work content probably is intelligent. So then the question becomes, what is their goal here? Is it to simply have their brand associated with athletes and to maybe dilute the association that the brand has at this point, which is these adult entertainer creators? Because as you mentioned, in a perfect world, they're probably, of course, hoping that Sabrina Stanley and other athletes on the platform are able to build large paying followings. To me, that feels unrealistic. So is the goal simply to diversify the association of what OnlyFans the brand is, if it's not to drive significantly more revenue?
It's a pretty big uphill battle. And also, I don't know where else they're making signings, but what would have to be true for that to actually work? I don't think signing a mountain biker in New Zealand and a trail runner, a single trail runner in the US, like I don't think that's going to turn the ship around for OnlyFans. Like they would need to sign a deal with like the NBA and the NFL to broadcast their live streaming, and they'd also have to somehow message to a wider community that, hey, by the way, when you land on our landing page, it's not going to be anything crazy. It's just going to be like safe stuff. And if you want to go down this, but again, like the idea of sending messages out as a brand, you should be able to distill it down to one sentence. And as long as OnlyFans exists in its current capacity, that sentence is always going to have an asterisk next to it. There's always more to it. Like, hey, we're doing sports content. Oh, and by the way, if you were looking for this, it's over here. Like, there's no way. There's no way this is going to work. I'm happy for the people that sign these deals that they're getting something to it, and maybe there's more to it. But gosh, I just don't see how this works. And no judgment for the people that took the money, but also at the same time, like, how is this a good fit for your platform? How does this emphasize your as an athlete your idea in a sentence? Who who are you, or what are you trying to be, that this further takes you another step further? Like every partner you sign should somehow be in line with who you want to show up as, and I just don't understand how this fits.
Yeah. So knowing Sabrina personally, myself, and being a fan of hers, you always talk about, Lucy, how is the athlete a good fit for the brand? And I would say of all athletes in trail running, Sabrina is the right fit for OnlyFans, in that Sabrina she's got a bit of, I don't know what the right word is. She's got personality and edge and confidence. And so when she posted the announcement about this new sponsorship, there was at least somebody in the comments who I think just said, ew. And her response, Sabrina's response was something like, yeah, who does she think that she is? In other words, just sort of like, not getting defensive, and instead just sort of kind of trolling the troll in her own Instagram comments. So you can see that, like, she's got this edge and personality, and she's not afraid to be controversial, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But then some of the feedback that I got based on the newsletter that I wrote, which I reposted on LinkedIn, was sort of like, yeah, it's a classic brand question, because if OnlyFans just cloned the software and had it function in the exact same way, but under a different brand, would you pay for it? And the answer is like, yeah, I probably would. So it just is a great example of how important brand is, how important the association of what your logo means and your name means in the brain of a consumer can ultimately determine whether or not you're successful in the marketplace. Because if we did launch the Second Nature subscription product as part of the original Galaxy Brain, and it was just a clone of the OnlyFans software, it could potentially work. Whereas I see this as being something that's going to be very hard to pull off in a way that like creates economic wins for OnlyFans.
Yeah, I mean, the true test will be in 2 years. Does OnlyFans re-sign Sabrina and Emma and Stefan Garlicki, the other mountain biker who signed? Do they all get re-signed because this is totally working for them as a turnaround approach to expand out into a new audience, or is it a one and done deal? One of the big things that we talk about in the YouTube space too is like brand safety. So not only what does this do to the rest of their deals? If they are sort of edgy and confident and whatever, maybe it emphasizes their standing. But could you imagine like a super family friendly brand wanting to partner with an athlete who is also, sponsored by OnlyFans? That might actually affect the rest of their deals down the line if they haven't thought it through.
Super interesting. Well, Sabrina is represented by Surveyor Sports Management. I've been in touch with her agent a little bit just via, I think it was Instagram DM, and she's potentially going to come on the Free Trail podcast and talk about it. She's got a race coming up, I think, this weekend too. So making her debut as an OnlyFans athlete. And I'm definitely open-minded to the idea. I think it's an innovative approach. You and I talk all the time, Lucy, about how athletes can really own their destiny. And this is an innovative approach to partnership that is new and different. And therefore, like, I'm intrigued and I appreciate the effort. But I think, we both agree that you and I being happily married dads, it's hard to envision ourselves becoming paying subscribers to anybody on that platform. But, I think overall it's a validation of the original Galaxy Brain too. So we got to take a victory lap, right?
Yeah. You can absolutely own that. And, look,
but it's a good question. Like why, Substack raised a shitload of money, something like they had a $600 million valuation. I think they raised $100 million. Like, why wouldn't they carve out $1 million and try something like this? Or Patreon, your boy Jack Conti over there, who we talked about a couple of episodes ago. It feels like there's an opportunity for one or both of those platforms to kind of do this playbook too.
Yeah, you can do live streaming on Substack already. You can have membership. There is a creator program that they're starting to fund some creators coming over to Substack. So I think a lot of this stuff does exist. It may be on Substack to do a better job of messaging that these things are available. And I think they're still sort of building up the audience and, kind of doing that. I think going back to the OnlyFans thing, the thing that I would be asking a question about, or what would it look like if this was going to work, would be OnlyFans actually helping these athletes up their content game across all of their platforms. That would be interesting. Like, hey, we're going to fund all of your content creation. And yes, it will show up on our platform, but we will also help you make a bunch of short form content. We'll help you make some long form content. We'll help build out your entire media program. That would be interesting if it could help raise all the boats, not just this one platform of OnlyFans. I think that if I were her agent putting that deal together, I'd be trying to carve out not just the financial incentives, but how could we actually get content that could be used in other places so that my entire platform can grow, and what would that actually look like? That's how I'd spread it out, I guess.
I think that something similar to that is happening at Twitter X right now. Have you heard about this? I can't remember exactly what the details are or where I heard it, but X is now recruiting creators to create shows that are not exclusive to the platform, but as I understand it, that would be the main distribution point, and they would have exclusivity for the first 24 hours. So for example, if it was a podcaster, you'd put the video and audio of the podcast up on X account, and then 24 hours later, you could distribute it via RSS to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. So I don't know, kind of a similar approach in like what you're mentioning here of having the backing of one of these technology platforms that have robust budget and incentive to have creators making native content on their platform, but not making it so that that creator is then locked into only that universe and unable to access potential viewers and listeners on other platforms. So maybe that's kind of a wave of the future.
Yeah, if you look at there's a platform called Twitch, which a lot of gamers use, right? And the number one way to grow on Twitch, and the creators themselves will tell you this, the number one way to grow your live streaming on Twitch is to have a YouTube channel that has all your cut downs from it. And so you might think about how that might work. And I guess that's sort of where I'm headed with this whole thing of, well, what if you had a YouTube channel with a big following that had cut downs from the stuff that you were posting on, this other website? That's where it could be interesting, where, yeah, there's incentive like, oh, I actually do want to see the rest of what's happening here. I got to see the highlight, but I want the full live stream. I want to join for the next one. That's exactly what Twitch creators are doing with YouTube. And you could see Twitch is a super popular live streaming website that millions of people go and subscribe and pay money to the creators for. But a lot of the discovery is actually happening off platform. And so if OnlyFans was going to take a page out of anybody's book, they should probably be looking at what Twitch has been doing. And yeah, there could be something really interesting to learn there and apply. And again, if I'm doing that deal for Sabrina, I'm thinking a lot about how this impacts the rest of her platforms and how I might be able to use the content creation lever from OnlyFans to spread out through the rest of her platform. Because ultimately, I would be somewhat surprised if this went through another contract cycle, and I'd want to take that energy and put it into building out the rest of her platforms so that she can, boost up her output.
Super interesting. Well, the fact remains that the Patreon for outdoor still doesn't exist, Aaron. Maybe we go pitch this to high-powered venture capitalists and build it from the ground up, which is an elegant transition to something else that's in the news as it relates to high-powered venture capitalists. We are not, the show that really wades into a lot of controversy here, but it feels like we got to talk about the Outside fiasco that's going on right now. Last week, there was a big thing on social media where some legendary Outside journalists and contributors demanded their names be removed from the Outside masthead in protest of some recent layoffs and basically just a disagreement in the trajectory that Outside has been on over the last few years. This is something we've talked about on the podcast a little bit, both with Mel Strong, whose firm Next Ventures was an early investor in this roll up, but before it was Outside, when it was Pocket Outdoor Media, and Robert Thurston was sort of trying to put together this massive outdoor and lifestyle subscription product that incorporated a bunch of legacy publishing platforms, mapping software like Gaia, Trailforks, some iconic media companies like Trail Runner Mag, Pink Bike, etc. It's not controversial to say that things have not gone as expected. And I feel like there's a lot to dissect here. From my perspective, this fits in the hashtag business is hard category. We are not here to try and criticize a bunch of people, but more just to try and absorb what we can learn from this whole thing. And I think there's examples of both bad luck and questionable strategy here. And I'd love to explore both. Where do you want to start with this, Aaron?
I want to start with one of the first things that was ever announced from Outside as part of their press release, and use that as a lens to just evaluate everything. They said, "We will become the global home for athletes." Does that ring true now in its current iteration? I would say no. Objectively, no. This is not a global home for athletes. And what I think ultimately, we can't tell at the moment what the final iteration of this whole thing is going to look like, or should, or if they're even close to doing it. What I think needs to happen is we talked about this actually on the phone. It was like this idea of titrating. They're sort of losing credibility with the core of the industry, but they need to put something out that people can identify to say like, oh, I get it. You guys have been doing all this work in the back end to release this thing. is that thing going to be strong enough that it becomes the global home for athletes? That for me is the litmus test of this entire thing, because as a lot of people have said, like, oh, magazine industry is hard. And we've talked to Simon about all this kind of stuff of like, what does partnership look like for print media these days? It's for the outside magazines and the, what was it, 44 different titles, pretty bleak. And in a lot of cases, they've shut down the actual print media titles. So I think that, the big picture, is it realistic for us to expect that, outside's original like print media magazines that we all get every month and read is the future of the company? I'd say no chance, unfortunately, because that's just the nature of our world. People aren't paying for print advertising when they can get a better deal and something actually measurable out of, meta ads or whatever. But I think like they have to sort of, outside has to put something up that people can identify as like, oh, all the trouble was totally worth it so that we could have this. And if I look at everything that's going on here, I just don't see it. I don't see my global home as an athlete. I'm just not seeing it. And I think that is the real litmus test. Like, you can wave your magic wand as much as you want, but like, if I can't see this product that is supposed to be the end result of all this strife, what was the point?
Yeah. So let's go back in time and remind our audience how this all came to be. And this is in line with what I just mentioned, in that part of this is bad luck, I think. And I loved in Kaylee Fretz's article, which I'm sure we'll link to in the show notes here, that at the end, he vocalizes an empathy for Robin Thurston, Kaylee himself being a longtime media operator himself and one of the founders of Escape Collective, which is a subscription-first digital media platform in cycling that is independently owned, and that, as he writes about, is populated by mostly people who have been let go from outside over the course of many layoffs. But back when this was all coming together and Robin Thurston had put Pocket Outdoor together, became its CEO, and it sounds like primary investor, started acquiring and rolling up a lot of these outdoor and active lifestyle publications. This was in the zero interest rate days when money was free, very easy to come by. And while there was ample liquidity in the venture markets where you could raise at very high valuations with almost nothing in return, that macroeconomic trend quickly and abruptly changed at an inopportune moment for them, making it much harder to raise capital and probably putting pressure on their businesses, which I think is another maybe thing in the category of questionable strategy. With these more old-fashioned media platforms that had been around for a long time, had a lot of brand recognition and long-time credibility in their respective communities, but also all of them kind of aging and not necessarily on trend with modern distribution platforms and, this wave of creators versus institutions. And so both the macroeconomic winds shifted there, but also there was, I think, a lack of recognition of where media was going generally. And so those two things coincided to create seems like a really volatile moment for outside pretty quickly, because it wasn't long after the interest rates shifted that the layoffs started happening at outside. The last thing I wanted to say here before throwing it back to you, Aaron, is that it is reminiscent of the conversation we have here all the time of like, what is the business of outside? And it seems like they still want the business to be this subscription product that's supported by advertising with the brands. And as I understand it, all the brands still really want to be featured in outside buyers guides. Also probably supplementing that with events revenue. If you follow Robin on LinkedIn or anybody from outside on LinkedIn, you know that they are putting a lot of effort into this outside festival, which will be coming back for the second year in May. But what is the business, right? Because the thing that you and I grew up with was media and very interesting, compelling, long form journalism. And the argument that Kaylee Fritz is making is that that product is decaying and decaying noticeably and badly. And this statement by these journalists removing their names from the masthead was a protest against the direction that the media is going. And if the media is the product and the core of the flywheel that spins everything else and it's decaying, that doesn't bode well for the future of outside the brand and business. And so it's big question marks here. And I felt like another inflection point moment in what has been kind of a series of challenging news cycles for outside. But comments on that little soliloquy there?
Yeah, what is the actual business? Or here's another thing to ponder. What if Robin quits? What if he just says, you know what? This is a failed experiment. I'm just going to shut it all down. I feel like we lose something still. Like, would it be better for him to say, it's over, everybody's out of a job? Or would it be better for him to at least try to like keep it going? I don't know the answer to this question, but what does that bring
Dude,
up?
the crazy thing is they raised $150 million. Like, that's not just like a seed round. That is a monster amount of money that probably valued the entity in totality at upwards of $500 million. I have no idea what the revenue looks like at outside, but in Kaylee Fritz's article, he sort of pokes holes in some of the forecasts that they made at that time. And really, his overarching general thesis is that none of these publications were meant to be scaled. Like, that the whole point of them is that they were small. And that, remember when we had Robin on the show, and I made the point that I view myself as the archetype subscriber to the outside ecosystem because I'm happy to pay for content. I'm mostly a trail runner, but if a cool mountain biking article is shown to me and I want to read it, it's cool that I pay for my subscription and I have access to that too. I also, as we mentioned with Robin, am an avid user of Gaia, which is owned by Outside, a fantastic product. And the analog in your community, Aaron, is Trailforks and other mapping software, mostly focused on mountain biking. But it seems like there's not a lot of people like me out there who are willing to pay for this subscription bundle or who see the value in it that, Robin formed this thesis around, and that originally I felt, and a lot of people felt in the outdoor industry, of like, this is a brilliant idea. Like, Outside's going to save all these struggling publications, and this is the wave of the future. In other words, what I'm trying to get across is that Robin had a big idea and he went for it. He raised a ridiculous amount of money. And the fatal flaw that Kaylee Fritz is identifying is that it was never meant to be scaled, and that the whole point of those publications were that they were small. A really important learning for both you and I, Aaron, like certainly for me, I texted it around to our team at Free Trail. I was like, we all need to read this and absorb this because like there are lessons in here. And so, for me, again, I just want to emphasize like #business is hard. I don't want to throw any shade at these people. Robin had a huge idea and he went for it. You can criticize the execution of it. There's also undoubtedly a lot of bad luck that went into it. And now Outside is in a tough spot, but it was born out of like a really ambitious thing that was meant to be a good thing for the outdoor industry as a whole. Hasn't turned out that way. And it's sort of getting ugly now.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to think about our conversation with him because my first question on the podcast was, what does the industry need? And the answer was just people to be nicer to each other, which I don't really think like that could have been a layout to be like, okay, here's exactly what it needs. There needs to be a global home for athletes, and here's what it needs to exist. And here's exactly what that should look like. And here's X, Y, and Z. I think one of the biggest assumptions that was made was that all users are created equal, and probably thought that all the users were going to be Debos, when realistically it's people that found Map My Run and are training for one marathon and then stopped using it, but they still count as a user. Like after that podcast was done, I used the outside digital platform to post a bunch of videos and share a bunch of mountain bike stuff on there and got zero engagement, like zero. And even the outside account had like 20,000 or 20 million, I don't even know, like a obscene amount of people following it, but every single time they posted they got like less than 10 engagements. I mean, it was just like no one's here and no one is asking for this stuff. One of the headlines in the Escape Collective article says Outside expands as part of a $150 million effort to create the Amazon Prime of the outdoors. So it's just, again, like, what are you actually trying to do? What is the
What is the
business?
product? Yeah.
And if you had $150 million, like, that's not enough to compete with Amazon. They will squash you. They are like a multi-billion-dollar company, and you're not going to make a foothold into Amazon. I'm sorry. And so, yeah, I just feel like they've, and we said this in the past too, they're trying to fight so many wars on so many fronts. And had they focused in on let's make a global home for athletes and let's make decisions on that, what do athletes want? They want really high quality content. They want the ability to track their stuff. They want the ability to book stuff. Like, you can see in some of those acquisitions where, yeah, that actually probably would have made sense to do that. But yeah, I don't know. It's, again, I just come back to the original vision of this global home and what's congruent to that and how could they get there, and are they even close? Like,
Yeah, it's hard to see. And the most recent acquisition in the news that happened right before this round of layoffs that concluded with last week's protest from longtime outdoor journalists was an acquisition of Inatopia, a platform I've never heard of, but evidently is used for travel booking. And it just makes you scratch your head of like, huh.
that one actually, the
And
way
then
it was
especially if it's
explained.
followed immediately by layoffs,
Yeah.
that signals to the market, to anybody with a brain, of like, we're going to spend money on this travel booking platform. We're not going to spend money on the people who put out the content that you have grown to know and love outside for. And so it just creates like a mass confusion for the people who are paying to be subscribers, myself included. And if the product is a travel booking platform and not creating compelling outdoor journalism, I mean, without stating it explicitly, you're stating it with these types of actions, which probably leads to churning subscribers. I haven't yet canceled my outside subscription, but it makes you wonder, like, what happens next here? Because I'm sure investors are going to want answers at some point. I don't know how much of that 150 million they still have in the coffers, but patience is a infinite supply with these people. And my guess is there's going to have to probably be some, very clear progress made in the near future. Otherwise, who knows? Like, does it make sense to start breaking it back up and unbundle this whole thing and, take Outside Magazine and like really try and allow it to be reborn in the original model of being a niche outdoor thing?
I mean, the unbundling is sort of already occurring in a way. Like, Escape Collective, like you said, is made up of a bunch of ex outside people, and it's a great resource. There's tons of amazing content on there. This is like the stuff that we want as athletes. This is a global home for cyclists. And so it's sort of like this unbundling, but in an unintentional way. And I think that was a lot of what they were talking about. They compared it to a forest fire where it kind of nukes everything big and small, but then you start seeing these kind of green shoots popping up. And I think Escape Collective is a great example of that, where there were a lot of people that worked at Cycling Tips and some of the other acquisitions, and then they ended up getting spit out, and here they are doing something new that has the stuff that we value. And whether they unbundle or not, this is probably going to continue happening, and there will be some amazing media outlets that come from this, and that's where we'll keep an eye on things.
Yeah. All right.
Tough one.
Tough one. Tough one. Business is hard. Yeah, and I think Kaylee in the article too, as I mentioned, he vocalizes empathy for Robin, which I really appreciated. It's sort of near the end of the article, and he says, you know, I doubt that if I were in Robin's shoes, I'd be able to do it any better, something to that effect, which I appreciated. Like, you know, this stuff is hard. And again, going back to 2020, 2021, when these acquisitions started happening in earnest, most people in the industry were psyched about it. Like, it was all over the news. Everybody was like feeling that this is going to be something transformative for the outdoor economy. And you can see why that vision was compelling, both to Robin as an operator and to investors. And it just comes down to the market tells you what it wants you to be, right? We've talked about this on the podcast too.
Yeah.
And in the case of Free Trail, in the case of Second Nature, in the case of Super Rider, it probably wants us to be very niche and very focused and not to be sidetracked into ambitious dreams of venture scale growth. It just doesn't work in our industry, or at least that's the lesson I'm taking from this personally. Actually, when we talked, Aaron, sorry to interrupt. When we talked, you said basically your takeaway from this is that, you know, venture capital, everybody should be nervous and scared about it. That's basically what you said to me, right?
Yeah, well, I think it's like if there's not a, you know, this is like a big goal that they're trying to accomplish, but like there's not actually a roadmap for this. And it's pretty clear that there's, you know, there doesn't seem to be a very obvious end point for this. And so, like we were saying, if you don't know what you would do with $1 million with Free Trail, then you shouldn't take $1 million. If I don't know what I should do with $1 million for Super Rider or even Second Nature, then we probably shouldn't take that money and run with it. And I think if you look at the bike industry specifically, what happens when you do have a massive success and then money comes pouring in and then things don't meet up to expectations? I mean, it's bleak right now in the mountain bike industry. It's absolutely bleak because we did have success and people were having that exponential growth, and then money came pouring in and then they couldn't meet that exponential growth year over year, and then a lot of people lost jobs. I don't know, like in the bike industry too, a lot of my favorite magazines don't exist anymore, and that's a super bummer. But a lot of the people
Green shoots, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Like Ride BMX was like part of my childhood and growing up, and I every single episode or every single magazine that arrived at my doorstep, I just like shred through in the first 10 minutes. And now it doesn't exist, but those guys went and turned into our BMX, and now there's an amazing Instagram, YouTube, podcast, everything that comes with it. So, you know, evolution is sort of an important part of this whole thing. And so I don't think it's fair to be, I mean, it's okay to be sad that print media is going away, but it's also just part of everything. Like there are not that many print magazines out there anymore, especially for, you know, niche activities like the ones that we care about.
Yeah. Tough all around, but yeah, I think a lot that we can learn through osmosis, you and I being media people ourselves.
Yeah.
And
That said, if anybody's got $150 million, let me know. I'll give you my Venmo account.
Yeah, that's what we're going to need to create the OnlyFans for outdoor, right? The Patreon for outdoor.
No, you just copy paste the code. It'll be fine.
Too easy. All right. So, all right, let's go to some Lutzy news. My boy got a book deal, and you hosted a little book club with the Second Nature meetup in Portland. Tell us about both.
Well, you know what's funny is that so last Friday was my 45th birthday, and to
Happy
celebrate,
birthday, bro.
Thanks,
My
man.
39th is a week from today.
Very exciting. Yeah, all the best people are born in March, so you know. I've decided for my birthday we would A, have the Second Nature meetup, but B, make it a book swap. So everybody bring one book, and we traded them at the end, and it worked really well. Other than the part where I got in trouble with the cafe owner for not calling ahead, I just didn't know how many people were going to be there, but quite a few people showed up. There was one book that I think everybody was eyeing up. It was this book called Ikigai. This guy Zach came and brought it, and I think everybody wanted this one book, and it was pretty obvious when everything was laid out. I actually brought some extras just in case people forgot, but I brought the Infinite Game, I brought the War of Art, and then I brought the Daily Stoic. Those are my three, but everybody else just brought one.
I think you mentioned all three of those when we talked about our favorite books back
Yeah,
like 50 episodes ago.
yeah. I mean, all excellent selections. So I just wanted to like pad the thing just in case anybody forgot. But actually, everybody brought books, so it was all good. Some people left with two. But the morning of the book swap, as we were walking into the cafe, I got an email in my inbox that a book deal that I've been working on for 4 or 5 months now actually got greenlit. So, boy's going to be a published author in the next, well, probably a couple years. It's going to take a little bit to put this thing together.
Let's go.
Yeah, pretty cool, man. I'm pretty fired up. Uh,
So
so
is it going to be mostly a written version of a lot of the stuff that your audience has grown to love you for? A lot of tutorial based how
yeah,
to mountain biking skills?
yeah, it's going to be a lot of sort of like getting into mountain biking and just learning kind of just the basics to get you rolling in the sport. So there have been books in the past, and in fact, this publisher put out another book that was like a little bit more advanced. It's got diagrams and all this wild stuff in it that I actually had a copy of the book. And I think the entry point rider, which is who I sort of service through my content, that's what this book is going to be for. So if you just got a mountain bike, this is like what you should buy along with the bike to start building confidence and control on the bike. So it's really clearly based in a lot of the content that I've already demonstrated online. And actually, fun fact, the acquisitions editor for the publishing house is a Second Nature listener, which is how we originally got connected. So this goes back to the point that I've been hammering for ages. Demonstrate your expertise on the internet and good things will come.
The expert of experts, Aaron would say.
I'm excited. I mean, man, I just it's going to be a lot of work to put together a book, but also I'm excited to have sort of another way to share what I've been working on. I've been thinking about it so much in the last 5 years of making all this content that I feel like I just need to take it out of my brain and put it on paper. It's not like I have to like make anything new. I just have to like write it instead of say it.
Congratulations, buddy.
Thanks,
Amazing.
man. Watch this space. So actually, I have until October to write it, and then I don't think it comes out until the following year. So it's going to be a minute, but this will be a really interesting experience from just content creation, understanding how the written stuff actually works, and
It'll be a fun little mini series to follow here on the podcast.
yeah,
Check in
yeah,
on you. See
little
how you're doing against your deadlines.
a little side quest,
How your
but
editor is criticizing, or I guess constructively criticizing
yeah.
whatever product you're producing.
Part of the approval was a full on chapter list. So I had to make this like proposal with all this stuff of like, who is this book for? What's the general theme of the book? What, give them a writing sample of how I write. But then also probably one of the most important parts of the approval was the chapter list. And we actually went back and forth a little bit on the chapter list. And I was like, hey, I'm great at talking about mountain biking, but you guys are the pros when it comes to like books. So you let me know like how this all looks. So really, I have the chapter list in front of me where now I at least have a little bit of format and structure that's pre-approved. And so it's almost in a way kind of like color by numbers, where I know you want a chapter on cornering. So here's the structure I'm going to have for that chapter. I want to make it as formulaic and easy to follow as possible and try to add in a few little extra things, but I hope it's straightforward. I don't know. We're going to find out.
Heck yeah, buddy. Can't wait to read.
Yeah.
Let me know when
yeah.
the pre-orders open.
Yeah, I'll keep you posted, and we'll have another book swap maybe in a year or two, and put that one out. But that was cool, man. The meetups, we've had 2 meetups. I know the Front Range, the Colorado crew has had a meetup now, and dude, you gotta have a meetup in the San Francisco area.
I gotta pull the Bay Area together. Luckily,
It's
a lot of our Bay Area crew are going to be coming out to the Big Alta this weekend, so we'll have an unofficial get together. Ton of
We're
free
gonna
trailers coming. It's going to be an absolute ball.
We're gonna do a meetup at Sea Otter as well. I think details to come on that. We'll put it in the Slack channel. But
Nice.
it's so
When is
cool.
Sea Otter?
Middle of April, so we got about a month or so. But
Uh,
man, it's so
Same
cool
weekend
to
as
like,
Gorge, probably.
yeah, same weekend. It's just so cool to actually meet up with everybody in person and sort of share, stories and insights and just riff on stuff together. It's sort of like the Slack channel in real life.
Yeah. Well, good for you, man. And yeah, we got to get the Bay Area Second Naturalist crew together. So make sure
Yeah.
you join that channel if you do live in the Bay Area. If you live in Portland, Lutzy's your point man on that local community. And hopefully over time, we've got a bunch of regional team captains in the Second Naturalist audience who can start bringing some industry folks together for networking, coffees, happy hours, all that fun stuff so that we can all, you know, lift each other's boats, so to speak, with a rising tide together. Should we get to BPC here, Lutzy?
You bet.
I'm unprepared. I'm a bad co-host. You go first. Let me think for a second.
We got to shout out our boy, Eric Lagerstrom. He is about to drop a film called Look for Things Where You Can Find Them. And he has been working on this one for quite some time. Basically, it is I feel like it's his love letter to multi-sport, like he's been doing so much with TTL to try to just get more people excited about the sport and excited about each individual sport and kind of show triathlon outside of the race course, because so much of it's just like between the tape. And what I think is really cool about Look for Things Where You Can Find Them, he goes to like different locations and just does the sport. And it just like filmed in exactly how Eric wants it to be filmed, edited it exactly how he wants it. Like this is like his sort of magnum opus, if you want, of how can you make like the ultimate film. And Eric has been talking about this idea for such a long time, and he's tried a few different iterations to get to this point, even some events that were more about just like participating in each one of the sports in one day. But this is it. So they're going to premiere it at the Oceanside Ironman event in April, and I'm sure it'll be available online after that. But this is like something that he's been working on for a pretty long time, and I'm really, really excited for him because he's sort of a visionary when it comes to all this stuff, and he's really into the cinematography, into the execution, into the look and feel of stuff. And when you're making a YouTube video every single week, it can be hard to put that like maximum quality in. And this one, I think Eric really got a hold of it, and it's going to be something special.
Sweet. Awesome. Shout out Lagerstrom. He's a trail runner now, Lutzy.
Yeah, you saw him in Arizona, right?
Yeah. He got second place in the Black Canyon 50K.
No big deal.
In fact, he beat the guy who won the race I did last weekend.
Amazing.
Yeah, this guy Chris Myers from Boulder, like hot young gun in the sport. Lagerstrom beat him at chucking out 50K. No big deal. He's coming on the Free Trail Pod.
Eric is?
Yeah.
Oh, nice. I'm here for that.
He's sat in here in my place a couple of times on Second Nature. So our audience is, I'm sure, familiar with him. But yeah, I'm excited to talk trail with him on the Free Trail Pod.
All these years of us in the background being like, you'd be really good at trail running. You should try to run on like it finally broke through, and now I feel like you could see it in his eyes, like, oh, this is it. This is it.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, one thing that just popped into my head that maybe would be fun to just close the show down with. I'm sure you're familiar with Anton Krupichka, right, Lutzy?
Mm-hmm.
He announced last week that he had re-signed with his sponsor La Sportiva, who he's been with now for going back 20 years. They sponsored him after he won his first Leadville 100 back in 2006. He then left La Sportiva to join New Balance for many years, which us old heads in the sport will remember. A lot of iconic products in that minimalist footwear era of the sport that Anton became kind of the figurehead for. He ultimately dealt with a bunch of injury in his career and metamorphosized from being kind of like a pure runner into more of like a mountain athlete, and went back to La Sportiva. It's probably been about 10 years now since he's been back with the brand. And now, like I said, he's just announced the extension of that partnership. Not sure how long, but my guess is it's kind of like a long-term, almost lifetime deal for him as he
Cool.
pivots into being kind of just like a legacy icon athlete. But I just pulled a quote from his post on Instagram that I pasted in the Free Trail newsletter I'm working on. So let me just read it real quick. It's just a quickly pulled from Anton's Instagram. It said, "In a world of appeasing shareholders with quarterly profits, I'm inspired by a company that for nearly a century has remained family owned and true to its core values of developing cutting edge products for the mountain athlete while giving back meaningfully to its immediate community." So maybe an appropriate way for us to end this episode, celebrating an independent, family-owned, small business that is over 100 years or whatever it's been, La Sportiva has carved out a solid business for itself in mountain sports and embraced the niche that it operates within, maybe without chasing exponential growth. And yeah, anyway, shout out to La Sportiva. Congrats to Tony. Congrats to both, I guess, on the extension of this partnership. And yeah, 20 years running at this point. Pretty cool.
Incredible. Incredible. Yeah. Well, we're 1 year in, so, you know,
let's go.
Just a little bit behind them.
88 episodes, 1 year, my lucky number. And now we are staring down the barrel of episode number 100, which is going to be coming up here soon, where I'm sure we're going to be doing another AMA. Is that right, Aaron?
Yeah, we're going to have to tee that up because we've got a couple episodes still in the hopper. We got Pace and McElvin coming up. We got some good ones. So, yeah, we're going to have to actually record episode 100 pretty quick here because I think we've only got a few left before we hit that milestone. Pretty huge.
All right, buddy. Good to catch up. What do you got going on this weekend? Raging?
Yeah, just celebrating 100, or, you know, celebrating the 1 year anniversary of Second Nature. Just continuing to grind away. Honestly, yeah, I hope we actually get some decent weather out here because I'm kind of jonesing to make some mountain bike videos. It's been pretty much raining nonstop in Portland. So I'm just going to hope that the sun eventually comes out one of these days. That'd be really cool.
All right, I'm going to be race directing all weekend at the Big Alta. So to our viewers and listeners, if you love trail running, tune into the Free Trail feed here this weekend. We're going to be putting out a lot of content. And it looks like, speaking of weather, knock on wood, should be a nice day for our runners. Can't wait to welcome everybody here to Marinwood. Amazing. Cool. All right. Well, if there's no more closing comments, make sure you go subscribe to our newsletter, secondnature.media. Follow us on Instagram. We've started posting a little bit on Instagram and got a collab with Kate Courtney. No big deal. That was a great episode, by the way, Aaron. Good for you.
That collab boosted us like 10% in our following.
Yeah. LinkedIn, Slack, all the links are in the show notes of today's episode. Great to get back on the horn, buddy. For Aaron Litzy, I'm Debo. See you guys next time.